Eh. Welcome to Things Fall Apart, page 90 to 120. The beginning of the section up to page 94 is, and I talked about this at the end of our lecture yesterday, the judicial system among the Igbo people, and it is very formal, and they have a jury and they have a judge, and it's very much like our system right now. And at the end of this section, they talk about how, why people would need to come before such a court for things that don't seem to be terribly important. I don't know why such a trifle should come before the Igwugwu, said the old elder to one another. Don't you know what kind of man Uzulu is? He will not listen to any other decision, replied the others. As they spoke, two groups of people had replaced the first before the Igwugwu, and the great land case began. And then they go on to the next case on the docket, right? Just showing that even though the European people, when they arrived in Heart Darkness, might not have been aware of these things. They have a court of law and systems very much like are going on in Europe. Going on a little bit, we get a story on page 96 from Akwifi, and that is Azinma's mother, telling the story of the tortoise. And once upon a time, all the birds were invited to a feast in the sky. They were very happy and began to prepare themselves for the great day. They painted their bodies with red camwood and drew beautiful patterns on their uli. Now, when the tortoise shows up, he sees all that's going on, and he convinced the rest of the birds to give him a wing so that he could, a feather rather, not a wing, that's kind of a big sacrifice, feather too, and then he could make his own wings. So they flew up to the sky for this big feast, and at this point, we see what Tortoise's problem is, his big flaw. Tortoise turned to all the birds and said, "You remember that my name is all of you. The custom here is to serve the spokesman first and then the others later. Then they will serve when I have eaten." He began to eat, and the birds grumbled angrily. The people of the sky thought it was their custom to leave all their food for their king, so the tortoise ate the best part of the food and then drank 2 pots of palm wine so that he was full of food and drink and his body filled out the shell. Now, his flaw, his fatal flaw, is greed, right? And wanting to kind of take advantage of other people to elevate himself. Now, Okonkwo has some similarities. Okonkwo's fatal flaw would be pride, a bit more than greed. But this is one of those kind of warning stories that let us know what's going to happen, right? And this is just as the tortoise ends up suffering for his fatal flaw, Okonkwo ends up suffering for his as well. Going on to page 101, we come back to the Azinma and Akwifi story. And as we talked about yesterday, Azinma, as one of those Agbanji child, numerous siblings had died, and she had gone ill. And Chilo, who is also the goddess, and kind of not a mother to Azinma, but seems very close to her, came and said that she was going to take her. And on bottom of page 100, it said, but Chilo ignored what he was trying to say. This is, Okonkwo pleaded with her to come back in the morning because Azinma was now asleep. But Chilo ignored what he was trying to say and went on shouting that Agbala wanted to see his daughter. Her voice was as clear as metal, and Okonkwo's women and children heard it from their huts, all that she had said. Okonkwo was still pleading that the girl had been ill of late and was asleep. Akwifi quickly took her to her room and placed her on the high bamboo bed. The priestess screamed. "Beware, Okonkwo," she warned. "Beware of exchanging words with Agbala. Does a man know when a god speaks? Beware." Now, most people, if they told Okonkwo to essentially shut up that way, what I think would likely happen is he would grab his machete and zoop, zoop, and then your head's on the ground. The fact that Chilo can essentially tell him to shut up, one of the things we talked about as paper topic you could write about is the role of women in the book, right? And while it appears on the surface as if they do not have a great deal of power or importance, they really do. And they are the primary goddesses, and of such power that they can tell the most powerful dude in town to shut up. Otherwise, they'll kill him. Going on, so Akwifi, Azinma's mother, was terrified with Azinma being taken away because all her other children had died, and so she followed her. And at first, on page 102, Okonkwo acts as if this is not a big deal. Azinma's voice soon faded away, and only Chilo was heard moving farther and farther into the distance. "Why do you stand there as though she'd been kidnapped?" asked Okonkwo as he went back to her hut. "She'll bring him back soon," Nwoye's mother said. Now, Okonkwo's trying to pass this off as he doesn't care too much, and this is not a big deal to him. But we'll see later that he really does. And this is one of those instances where Azinma can bring out a more feminine side of him or a more complete side of him, as opposed to everything that we see from him being hypermasculine and violent and lack of emotion and expression. So Akwifi follows her all night until they get to the cave. And it said, but at that moment, Chilo, going on a little bit, Chilo had been changing before they even get there. Sorry, we're not quite to the cave yet. On page 107, it said, the moon was up now, and she could see Chilo and Azimma clearly. How a woman could carry a child of that size so easily and for so long was a miracle. But Akwifi was not thinking about that. Chilo was not a woman that night, because she is the goddess, right? So in this culture, gods and people can kind of move back and forth, gods in particular, and most of the time Chilo is just Chilo, but when the spirit comes upon her, then she becomes Agbala and becomes a very, very powerful person or spirit. Going on page 108, they finally get to the cave. As she stood gazing at the circular darkness, Chilo took Azimma into this cave, tears gushed from her eyes, and she swore within her that if she heard Azimma scream, she would rush into the cave to defend her against all the gods in the world. She'd die with her. When she got there, a man stood there with a machete in his hand. Akwifi uttered a scream and sprang to her feet. Don't be foolish, said Okonkwo's voice. I thought you were going into the shrine with Chilo, he mocked. Akwifi did not answer. Tears of gratitude filled her eyes. Go home and sleep, said Okonkwo. I shall wait here. I shall wait too. It's almost dawn. The first cock is crowed. Now, going on a little bit, we get a little more of Okonkwo's view of that coming up a couple pages. And on page 112, it said, as they were preparing for this wedding, Okonkwo was also feeling tired and sleepy, for although no one else knew it, he'd not slept at all last night. He felt very anxious, but did not show it. He was terrified when Azimma was taken away, and when his wife went to follow her into the darkness. When he thought they had waited long enough, so first he went to the cave, and then he realized that they probably went to all 9 villages first, and then he went back to his home. Then he went back to the cave, and then he went back to his home. But the hills and the caves were as silent as death. It was only on his 4th trip that he had found Akwifi, and by that time he had become gravely worried. So you can see this emotional, caring side of him coming out. He doesn't show it to anybody, right? And the only way we see it is because of the narrator. But Azimma brings out a not more important side of him, but an important side of him, right? And makes him a more complete, well-rounded person. Going on, starting on 115 to the end of this chapter, we get a little bit of a story. Of how different people from different clans and different villages can get married and the ceremonial aspects that go underway with that. And that's where we're at. So that's a fairly short section. So tomorrow we'll talk page 120 to 150. We'll get a couple sections left. So as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email, and I'll talk to you soon.